some announcements. We want to thank Michelle for being with us this morning. I think we haven't heard her yet. I'm on a roll. Okay. Good, 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 good. Look at that face from Mark. Yes. All right, Mark. Anyway, we got some good news. We got Michelle with us this morning. Tracy with us in 2 weeks. Tracy will be with us on March 9th. I spoke to her this morning. And maybe Michelle and Andrea will be joining us too. We'll see. I'll talk to you guys about that too. And just share with us, Naki has been back with us. He had his program with us this week, for which we're very grateful. That continues on a monthly basis. We had a very interesting end to connections this week. Everybody was talking about books they were reading. And I want you to know the people in Connections were reading absolutely fascinating books, everybody except the minister, who was reading a series of books that are best explained all by the Southern phrase, "That ain't quite right, Claus, that ain't quite right." I've been reading Terry Pratchett's work, and Pratchett is out of his insane. Everybody else is reading kind, good, spiritual, uplifting things, and I'm out into the universe. Speaking of the universe, by the way, before we go any further, there's been a lot of stuff lately about the universe, and I don't know if any of you have realized that when somebody says something is only a light year away, 1 light year is 5.7 trillion miles. So I read the other day, Andromeda, our closest big galaxy, is only 2.2 million years away. So that's 2.2 million times 5.7 million, and that's how close it is. Moving right along. So again, one more time, we have a big march with Michelle with us and Tracy. And we have an April coming up that is absolutely wild. Every Sunday in April is going to be filled up. Larry will be with us in the beginning of April. We'll have Tracy with us. I will be preaching. Now, I hope you can appreciate the humor of this. The Bible lesson I'm looking at for Easter is taken from the book of Deuteronomy. That absolutely will make no sense to anybody. In fact, Michelle will tell you if I had 1,000 clergy here, I would say, if I said, "Is anybody have using Deuteronomy as a passage for Easter?" Everybody would look like, "What? Are you out of your mind? Why?" Yes. Okay. Moving right along. So we got a big Easter coming up, big month of March and April. Starting off, we want to remember in our prayer requests, by the way, a lot of prayer requests this week. We want to remember Benjamin Lattanzio, the patriarch of the family who passed away, was a beloved person, a oldest relative of Michelle's father, who may he rest in peace. We're asking some prayers ecumenically for Pope Francis, who has tried to bring some light into a interesting institution. And he is evidently very, very critically ill and is not responding to medicine right now. He's 88 years old, 88 years old. Okay, we want to remember longtime people who have passed away with Michelle in hospice this week, and that always takes a toll on the nurses as well as the chaplains. We want to remember that there are several people in All Souls right now going through some serious health issues. Several names, which I will not mention, but just keep in your mind and thought, there are those amongst us as well. I want to also share with you that sometimes humor comes in strange places. I hope you'll appreciate this. We were without the internet for 24 hours. Now, I don't know if any of you really thought about this, but there was a time before cell phones and the internet. There was a time. And I want to remind you, you could easily get very much in trouble without the cell phone or without the internet. Not having an internet for 24 hours, especially when your wife's business depends upon it, is a bit nerve-wracking. They couldn't figure out why, so at their expense, Xfinity sent an incredible tech to the house to figure out what was going on. And as he walked in, I could see he was a bit tense. And I said to him, I gave him a hug and I said, "This is a DEI house." And at that point, he put his arms around me and said, "Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you," and laughed and laughed. And I thought, it's come to this. So in case anybody is wondering, yes, this is a DEI congregation from the beginning, as is the supper and everything we do. Having said all that, then let us light our candle for the specifics that we mentioned and for the thousands who are now suddenly without work, without dignity, without respect. We light a candle for them as well. And we light a candle for all of those who are suddenly finding their identity and personhood are being attacked in ways that we did not think was going to ever happen. So we light the candle this week for lots and lots of people, most unknown to us, but we keep in our hearts. So one more time before we begin then, we've got Digit here, Karen, Paul, Michelle, and Mark, Naki and Mr. Teach, Danny, Sorkin, Alan and Eddie, Ray Roldan is here, Felix is here with Tiger, Nick is here, Charmaine is in Ibiza, North Carolina, Pat Sullivan is here, Maureen is here, Cecilia Alessandro is here, Cindy and Larry are here, Sarah, who is Nick's mom, is here from Alabama, Pat Kincaid is here, and Nikki Lindquist is here, as well as is the other half of the house. We begin then with an introit from the Nuclear Whales Saxophone Orchestra. I can't think of a more fascinating example of finding joy when you least expect it. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Our call to worship this morning is from Let Us Hear the Words of Martin Luther King Jr. Call us to worship this day. As my sufferings mounted, I soon realized that there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation. Either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. I decided to follow the latter course. And our morning prayer today, if you would say with me, those of you who wish. Prayer for our nation, healer of every ill. Breathe in and amongst all of us who dwell in this land. Soothe our wounds, calm our fears, mend our divisions, hope of all tomorrows. Open our deaf ears and fill us with compassion. Tender our hearts. Inspire creative ideas to address the crisis of our sisters, brothers, and Earth itself. Send forth your spirit of love and unity. Transform pointed fingers of blame into hands open in reverence to receive one another. Fan into flame the gift of our founding, and let it be known again as a people united for the goodness, justice, and people. And let us be known again as a people united for the goodness, justice, and people of peace of all people everywhere. Amen. And Anaki will do our first reading for us. Excuse me, music, Talking Heads. Anaki is going to be reading this morning from the famous Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You would be so kind, Anaki.
Fear is the boat in Germany, in our own lives, and in the nave of this church. Naked fear of an hour from now, of tomorrow and the day after. That is why we become apathetic, why we complain, why we intoxicate ourselves with this and that. But look here, right in the middle of this fearful world is a place that is meant for all time, which has a peculiar task that the world doesn't understand. It keeps calling over and over, but always anew, in the same tone, the same thing. Fear is overcome. Don't be afraid. In the world you are frightened, but be comforted. I have conquered the world. Christ is the boat.
A responsive reading for those of you be so kind to read in the green. We must row in whatever boat we find ourselves in. We generate fears while we sit. We overcome them by action. Where there is no hope, we must invent it. And how should we behave during this apocalypse? We should be unusually kind to one another, certainly, but we should also stop being so serious. Jokes help a lot. And get a dog. Okay, excuse me, and get a cat too, if you don't already have one, from Kurt Vonnegut. And a reading again by Anaki.
During the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. The dance kept us in the fight because it was the dance that we were fighting for. It didn't look like we were going to win then, and we did. It doesn't feel like we're going to win now, but we could. Keep fighting. Keep dancing.
So I'm opening my share today with some words from another of our progressive Christian liberal traditions. And I'll be also quoting from two more during the course of the share, and there's a reason for that. We need to know who our allies are. We need to know what other communities are allied with our intentions to build a world of love and justice. This is the baptismal vow from the United Methodist Church. Do you accept the freedom and power God gives you to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves? To which I say, yes. We must accept the freedom and power to resist evil. If not us, then who? In times such as these we are experiencing, we need some solid anchors to keep us sane. For me, this comes from seeking out wisdom from the written word, from songs, and from art and nature. I need reminders of not only how to cope, but also why to keep going. Sometimes the world seems to shrink around me and I can't see the proverbial forest for the trees before me. That's when I know I need to stop, rest, and recenter myself. I've been feeling lately like Gregor, the protagonist of Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, who wakes up one day to discover he has become a cockroach overnight, a permanent and for him a lethal outcome. Perhaps some of you have had a similar experience this year. So, in response, I am advocating for both resistance and persistence. As my sister Charmaine has pointed out to me before, you can't spell the word persistence without the word pest. Also, you can't spell the word resist without the word rest. In response to the fear and terror in the country and the world, I'm advocating for making holy pest of ourselves to the oppressors in power and taking regular times of rest so we aren't burning out. This fight is ongoing for the foreseeable future. And while change is inevitable, the only constant thing in life, after all, is change. We need to keep moving forward with purpose, with love, with compassion for ourselves and for others. Dietrich Bonhoeffer spoke to a time similar to our own in Berlin in 1933 in his sermon, Fear in the Boat. This was just prior to Hitler seizing power, and Bonhoeffer could see the way the future of his country was shaping up. His sermon was centered on the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, verses 23 to 26. Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Bonhoeffer points out in the rest of his sermon, that was fear, all right, but it was faith in the midst of fear, because it knew where help comes from, the only place. I think we can more broadly define who, what, and where Christ is in this story in light of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Christ is each one of us, as we are all in the boat. And our collective job right now is always to strengthen each other, to find the goodness and love for all life in each other, and to call it forth. Whenever people ask me as a chaplain, where is God right now, Chaplain Michelle, when their loved one is actively dying before us? An especially poignant question when the person dying is very young. I always say some version of the following. God is in the eyes of the people who love you and are offering you their help. God is always present with us, and the way that happens is through the other people around us. No burning bushes, no thick clouds, just other everyday people. As the United Church of Christ billboards say, God is still speaking. Yes, they are. And if we listen carefully to the cries of the wounded and oppressed, we will hear them speak. We studied Bonhoeffer in seminary, and his words always come back to me when society seems to be coming undone again. We need civil courage right now. It is incumbent on every single one of us to participate in our collective survival and liberation. And we also need a clear understanding that no one's hands are clean. We all bear some responsibility for brutality, and it does not stand that any of us can stand above the fray. Perhaps this is what folks are having such a hard time with now in our own faith tradition, which is really a microcosm of the larger society. White folks pushing back at the term white supremacy, lest they should have to consider their own complicity in it, witting or unwittingly. Civil courage rests on having commitment to strong community, where my liberation is bound up in yours and not in identity politics. Bonhoeffer also wrote in another piece, in the great majority of cases, inward liberation must be preceded by outward liberation. I am with Bonhoeffer in advocating for an approach of humility, not trying to pretend we are above the foolish, for we are all of a piece with each other. Again, a collectivist approach is required, where we stay in community, in covenant with each other, for this is the only way through the darkness of folly. What we are seeing, broadly speaking, is political and capitalist success achieved by situational ethics, wherein the ends justifies the means. We must resist this rudderless morality with no moral compass pointing true north. We hear a lot of abstract principles spoken from sources like the press, various pulpits, from politicians, and what we need is concrete responsibility. Our actions then must directly reflect the outcomes we wish to see. The Right Reverend Craig Loya, Episcopal Bishop in Minnesota, wrote an excellent post the other day on Facebook that is worth sharing in its entirety. Here goes. One, possibly unexpected, source of strength and nourishment for us in these days can be found in the Ten Commandments. Mainline progressive Christians tend to bristle at this important feature of the Hebrew Scriptures, largely because they have been so often co-opted by a Christian nationalism that wants to install them in schools and government buildings as part of imposing a distorted Christian vision through state force. But as Walter Brueggemann outlines in his magnificent book, Money and Possessions, the Sinai commandments are a prohibition against organizing life as a pursuit of possessions. They are guidelines for how to live well and faithfully outside Pharaoh's world, which is devoted to the pursuit of possessions. The commandments are a championing of reliable, durable relationships of trust as an alternative to a pursuit of commodity. The commandments remind us that Pharaoh says work, God says rest. Pharaoh sees people as commodities to be used for personal gain. God sees every neighbor as worthy of dignity and love. The Ten Commandments contrast Pharaoh's economics of oppression with God's economics of liberating neighborly love. They are a manifesto for a new community of resistance against the ever-present evils of empire, which seeks to own, exploit, and possess. The church, he says, will always fall into the trap of empire when it sees its work as gaining and possessing. When our goal is gaining more people and money in order to sustain ourselves, we are thinking like Pharaoh. When we see ourselves as a sacramental community of witness and resistance, enlisted by God to join God's work of healing through liberating neighborly love, we're on the right path. In this present moment, how can your community and how can we together follow Jesus in letting go of our attempts to fill ourselves and instead place all our focus on willing good for the neighbor, the dispossessed, the pushed aside, and the enemy? How can we set down the zero-sum fight to the death between the right and the left and offer instead the unimaginable vision of God's perfect, liberating, all-embracing love? As Dan Savage said in our second reading today regarding the AIDS crisis, the dance kept us in the fight because it was the dance we were fighting for. This is how we call the vision of beloved community into being. We must triage our wounded and our most vulnerable communities, and we keep focused on the outcomes we want to celebrate. Our liberation practices are key to our survival. Wonderment, joy, faith, education, art, dancing, singing, building community. Hold out your hope, your joy, and your love as a beacon to light not just your way, but those of others who may be lost. We all need each other to survive. May it be so, and may we be the ones to make it so. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be.
Michelle suggested we become pests. It's going to take a long haul, she said. Well, then you need some nourishment. And let me suggest one way to look at the supper that we have every time we gather is it is nourishment for the road. The road to include us all, we are diverse, to make sure we are all equal in whatever ways we can be, and to be doggone sure we're inclusive of everybody. That's going to take some nourishment. And the meal then, if you will, becomes a symbolic act of nourishment deep, deep, deep within our history as a species. Going back to 10,000 BCE, and the Levant is when the first plantings of a rough kind of grain took place, involved a lot of hard work. And sometimes the best you could do was offer some simple bread and a simple cup of fresh water or watered down wine if you couldn't trust the water. As simple as you get. And you ask people, come in and have some refreshment. Oddly enough, the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy keep mentioning these two, which are not my books. Remember, you too were a stranger in a foreign land. Remember, you too were a guest. And as people fed and nourished you, so you should feed and nourish the stranger amongst you. And the stranger may very well be our neighbor, may very well be the dispossessed down the street spiritually and emotionally. It may be one of our own who is feeling unloved and uncared for. So we offer bread, simple bread from a simple plate, a very simple cup, and offer to all every time we gather. Nourishment for the road. And as always, we turn to the in-house theologian, Winnie the Pooh. And I ask you to read after me. Promise me you'll remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, smarter than you think. God didn't promise days without pain, laughter without sorrows, and sun without rain. But the divine did promise strength for the day, comfort for the tears, and light for the way. Michelle, if you lead us in our concluding prayer.
Our concluding prayer today comes from Lauren Brantz from her poem, Inauguration 2025. In a time of hate, love is an act of resistance. In a time of fear, faith is an act of resistance. In a time of misinformation, education is an act of resistance. In a time of poor leadership, community is an act of resistance. In a time like this, Joy is an act of resistance. Resist, resist, resist.
Now may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. And may the rains fall softly upon your fields. And when we meet again, oh, when we meet again, especially in times like this, may the divine in me greet and embrace the divine in you. May it be so. Amen. Well, thank you all very much for being here this morning. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Digit, for doing tech. Thank you, Anaki, for reading. Thank you, Felix and Charmaine and Danny and Nick and Gail and Tom for being with us. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Pat and Cecilia and Cindy and Larry and Sarah from Alabama and Pat Kincaid and Alan and Eddie and Maureen and Pat Kincaid, Pat Sullivan. Thank you all. And Nikki Lindquist, there she is right there. And Danny Sorkin, thank you all so much, so much, so much. In 2 weeks, we'll have Tracy with us, and then Michelle again, and then Larry in the beginning of April. We've got quite a few weeks coming up. So blessings to you all. And remember, some joy is good. Some humor is a marvelous antidote. Bless you all. Bless you. Bless you. Bye-bye now.
Good week, everyone.
Wishes everyone be well.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.